17 minutes past 4, mainland Spain. Pleased to welcome Antonio back from Pellicer Heredia, the Alicante lawyers. They let you back out. Generally, when the boys have been away or when there's been a holiday, they let you out. They do, don't they?
It's San Juan, isn't it? It's Fogueras in Alicante, and therefore here I am.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. There's a lot of cleaning up going on after San Juan, I understand. The newspaper's not very happy about the fact that the beaches were not cleaned up by the people who were there.
They should have.
They should do.
Yeah, they should do it.
But that's not what's been happening. Anyway, we're here to look at the property market, property in general. Any questions anybody might have about the property situation in Spain from a legal footing, then please do get in touch while we're talking to Antonio. He's one of the experts at the company. 684-455-844 for your WhatsApp or email, studio@BayRadio.fm. Let's start then with the amount of properties on the market. Number of mortgages taken out on homes registered on the property registries grew by 14.4% in April. Nearly 40,000 transactions. That's a 10-month rise, according to new data from the National Statistics Institute, the INE. That's an incredible amount of properties, and it keeps growing. This cannot continue, surely.
Well, that's what they've been saying for the last couple of years, haven't they? And the proof is in the pudding. It's in fact rising quite steadily. I had a conversation last week with a client, and we were discussing the amount of mortgage he was going to get on the property. And I was telling him, well, if you only need 100,000, then that would be, yeah, but I can ask up to 200. Well, yeah, but if you only need 100, it's like, no. The mortgage rates in Spain are so low compared to, and this guy was from the United States, was compared to the United States, that basically any money that I can borrow is free money.
So it's 2.98%, something like that,
Yeah,
I guess, something around about that.
I don't think it really is that low, but it looks like compared to other countries.
That's the average interest rate, I guess, in Spain.
Yeah. Yes. But clients that I have from Iceland always buying with mortgage because interest rates there are 9-10%. Right? Yeah, I know. And this guy from the States says it's the same. It's impossible to get anything below 7 or below 8. So obviously 2.93, 3.5. It's practically free money.
If you take an extra 100,000, what are you going to spend it on? Extension,
No.
pool, or just take it, put it in the bank?
No.
Well, he's not going to make a lot there, though.
That's true, because if there's not much interest on mortgages, there's also not much interest in deposits or bank products. But no, what he said is instead of running out of capital, he'll borrow as much as he can, and then he'll use his capital to buy something else.
Okay. Right. And that's okay? The banks don't mind?
Oh, yeah, no, the bank are delighted. Think about this. If you give back, I don't know, 30 euros for every 100 euros that you borrow, if instead borrow 100,000, you borrow 200,000, then instead of giving back 30, you are going to give back 60. So they are obviously delighted.
Okay. Also, we are seeing, though, that perhaps the properties that people are after are becoming less and less available.
Yes, that's true. Yes, there's a shortage of properties. In fact, it has come into a point. It's quite madness. It's definitely a seller's market in which the sellers rule the land. I had a case, and this is a real case, of a client of mine buying a property in London. He was delighted. He found a property. It was a campo, not really that big, although it looked nice, at least paperwork-wise, which is what I like.
Okay.
And it was 400,000 euros, which is not cheap by any means. But again, paperwork-wise, the property was almost perfect, and I think the client really liked it. And we were about to sign the reservation agreement. There was a little bit of a delay by the seller. The buyer was absolutely committed to it, had already signed it, had threatened to transfer the funds even without the contract being signed by the other party. And then we discover that the seller has decided not to sell it to him. He said, well, no, I'm selling it to you too cheap. I will sell it to you for 10% more, 440,000 euros, or you just go and take a walk.
That sounds like the sort of thing that was happening pre-2008 as well.
It's almost an extortion.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're going to have it for that. And they had a verbal agreement, but nothing was signed.
Nothing signed.
So, yeah, it's kind of, it's not the best situation.
Also, it doesn't do good to appear too keen, I guess.
No, of course, yeah, right? But if
hedge your bets a little,
I know, and this client is not the only one that has something like that happen to that. Another client of mine also, a week and a half ago, flew over to book a property. So they looked at property online. They made an offer to the seller. The seller accepted it. That was maybe a Friday. So they flew over to meet with the seller on a Monday. So they were meeting him on like at 10 a.m. on a Monday, and they were meeting me at 12. Basically to wrap and have a contract signed like then and there. So, to close the deal. And when he came, they were looking crestfallen. Oh, what happened, John? He was John. And he says, he said he's not sure to sell it to us. He likes the other couple more. What other couple? No, he showed it to other couple, even though we told him we would buy it for him, from him, and he's unsure of what he's going to do. He says he's been sold too quickly because the property was in the market for like 1 hour before we called.
So, well, yes, but we see this, don't we? I mean, okay, I can see why sellers might think, hang on, if it sold that quickly, maybe it was being sold for too little. So then they will think, I should have got more, I'm going to hang on and get more. But I guess this is what happens when it's a seller's market.
That's right. Not because the prices are necessarily low, which for certainly they're not. It's just because the buyers are starved of properties that they like or properties that are available. I have two kinds of cases. Either the clients that have things like this happen to them, like these two examples that I put it again, happened to clients of mine, and as 1 or 2 weeks ago. And also the other one is having the clients come to me with properties that, honestly, are not fit to be sold.
We spoke before, didn't we, about a property that somebody was really keen on, but the cadastral was split.
That's right.
Even though it was the one property, it was had two.
All kinds of
pieces of paperwork.
problematic properties. A property being, I had all kinds of cases like that, particularly rural areas. An apartment's a little bit more easier, although I have an example for later if you want to.
Sure.
About an apartment purchase gone wrong. I always say they're safer, but there's always, due diligence is
We'll
always required. But yeah. So either you have one or the other. Obviously, there's a lot of properties that are perfectly fine, or, almost fine. But there's more and more of the others. Properties that normally would not be in the market because they still need, attending to, or they should have been sold at a really deep discount.
You can look on the property portals and find specifically rural properties. There's all kinds of stuff for sale. There are sheds for sale for 30,000 euros when they're probably not even, they should just be knocked down, basically.
So I have clients seriously coming to me, it's like, Antonio, is there any way whatsoever I can safely buy this? And I look at it as like, I don't know what to tell you. I obviously take a serious look, and if we can sort it out, or at least if I can properly inform the client is what we do, right? So it's not that I mind that the property is not fit to be sold or to be bought. Obviously, that happens. What I would do in those cases is really study the case and then clearly explain to the client what he's buying and what are the risks involved. So he makes an informed decision of what he was going to do, either buy it or not. Most people, we would say that's 50-50. There's people that go for it and people that they'll still say, listen to me and say, no, yes, I'll move on.
You can write in sometimes certain different clauses for things, can you not?
Yes.
You can. So that's possible, under the scenario. So say perhaps, your lawyer does uncover something that perhaps wasn't declared, or that something that might be a problem in the future, then that can be written into the contract.
Yes, provided the contract is properly done, right? I had also one case, not that long ago, about a month ago. The clients were what we call rebound clients. They wanted to go rogue by themselves and buy a property in BR, which is fine. And the problem is they wanted a rural property. BR is a small town in the countryside. So therefore, the kind of properties that you may find are the ones that we're describing. So they went, saw the property, and they discovered there was something wrong. But they already had signed a reservation and pay a deposit. So when they would try to pull out, the agent told them, yeah, perfect, yeah, you can
But
buy.
we're keeping your deposit.
But we're keeping the 3,000. And they came to me with a contract, and I looked at it and says, yeah, they're keeping the 3,000. It's like, really, there's not much that you can do. There's nothing here that will cover you, even if you find something on the property.
So they went ahead without following the legal advice.
Well, they didn't have any legal advice whatsoever. They just went to the estate agent and they trusted the estate agent directly. The estate agent thought that they were understanding what they were buying, which clearly was not the case. And therefore, when they discovered later what was the problem, that for them was a deal breaker, they wanted to pull out, but they were unable to pull out and recover the funds. So they lost 3,000.
Yeah, terrible. And that, these sort of things do happen.
Yeah.
You have some ideas about ways that perhaps the property market could be eased. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the break. We're finding out all about the latest on the property market in Spain. Another few other stories that are currently happening for us to talk about with Antonio from AlicanteLawyers.es. That's Antonio, the property expert, with us this week. And we were talking just before about the amount of properties that are available or no longer available, the types of properties that people are after. This has prompted a couple of the big portals in the last couple of weeks to say they're a little bit concerned that in the next 2 to 3 years they might run out of properties or run out of affordable properties, which would then produce a crash similar to what we saw in 2008. Perhaps not as big. That was pushed by the subprime mortgage issue in the States and banks crashing all over the place, but still a possible property crash. Nobody wants to be hearing about that while there are cranes on every corner and brand new properties going up, of course, and people are still clamouring after properties and wanting to buy. But when two of the biggies in the market say that they're a little bit worried, and we know there are lots of things in the market that need fixing, and there are lots of problems with property in Spain, not least for residents who have difficulty being able to afford affordable housing to start, or even affordable properties to rent. Lots of difficulties there. What about a way to solve this issue? The government are trying various different ways, and local governments are trying different ways. There are a number of ways to try and help solve the problem. You have a rather good idea about the bad bank known as Sareb, where all the properties ended up when the crash in 2008. So basically, the government bought all of these bad properties, put them all in one place, and a lot of them are still sat there in this bad bank.
Yes.
So they could be used.
Dying of laughter, to say something. But
Yeah.
The Sareb still has thousands and thousands of properties, some of them in really good condition, others not so much, but still at a relatively affordable price. The price is lower than you could find on an open market, because there's not technically a seller that has an invested interest on the sale or the income that they could make out of that one property in particular. So
and these are banks that are not interested in selling them, or people who own.
Definitely not interested in selling them. The Sareb, so the Sareb is a weird thing.
Right.
It's like a deposit of properties, like a cemetery where the properties go to die.
Yeah.
So what they should have, for example, is a website with a search engine in which you could easily look for properties just owned by the Sareb by towns, and then look them up and visit them if you wanted to, and that doesn't exist. So how come it
doesn't exist?
Because they are not interested in selling them for some reason. So, but if you manage, this is like A-Team. If you manage to find one of those properties, then if you look past the problems they may have, you may be able to buy them. Sareb properties normally come with a legal tangle or with a legal problem. Maybe they have a standing debt that needs to be cancelled. Maybe they have debts for local taxes, the utilities are disconnected, and the properties may be slightly derelict. So no lights, maybe no
half
doors.
finished. There's one just by your offices near where I live.
Correct.
And they just threw all the occupants out a couple of weeks ago, and now they've started to basically finish it off. It was probably about 80 to 85% finished, I think.
Correct. Yes. Solid. The last portion, a bit of paperwork. It will take some money, but you can definitely either live in it or make a profit. I had a case last year in which we had a client that bought a whole building from Sareb at a really good price. Obviously, he paid a lot of money for it, but he bought like 5 apartments, prime real estate in Teulada. Well, technically Moraira, like 3 minutes from the sea, and it was a whole building. So what they were almost finished. They had no kitchens and obviously no furniture, but what's the installation, the pipes, the electrics, the air conditioning, AC vents, all of that was installed.
Right.
So he maybe had to spend 200,000, 300,000 to fit all the 5 apartments plus the garage spaces, and then he could either flip them and sell them at a profit or rent them out. I think it has been very profitable for him, and he managed to get a really good deal on the purchase. So that obviously is a little bit of an extreme case because it requires a lot of money as an investment plus buying the properties itself. But you can manage to buy them with a mortgage.
I was going to say, how many single properties are available through this bank? Nobody knows.
Thousands and thousands.
Thousands and thousands. And what's stopping the government then making these available? Because if the government bought them and put them all in this bad bank, then surely the government owns them.
Yes,
the
of
government
course.
has a problem with housing, so surely they could start to resolve that
And it
issue.
could be the best solution for them to sell them. That way,
Even
they
if
will
they turn them
cash.
into social housing, which
Right,
which
for
is what the
example.
big one of the big problems is.
Why not? There's buildings that are half finished. The government could take over, have it finished, creating wealth and jobs, and then once they're done, classify it as housing. Yes, for public housing for people that cannot afford it at reasonable rent. Yeah, but they're not interested in that. It's the government is not really interested in solving the housing crisis.
Well, the government have got. We talked before we came on air. The government have got a number of problems on their plate at the moment, and I would just like to say that what I was telling you was that as you were walking up the stairs, Pedro Sanchez was talking, the Prime Minister, at the NATO summit, and said that he was going to go for re-election, which was not something that anybody expected him to say today. Certainly not at the NATO summit, with all the problems he's got going on at home and the issues about the 5% of GDP that Donald Trump wants Spain to spend.
Of course.
So it's a classic case of Teflon Pedro's deflection, I think, by saying, I'm going to go for re-election. I was like, what? We weren't expecting him to say that.
Definitely. Let's see if what he says when he comes back. But yeah, definitely. Anyway, the housing crisis is definitely a problem. There's a lot of properties out there, either being owned by Sareb or just people or big companies that hold hundreds of properties that are not on the market for rental or sale, because they prefer to speculate some of them, others because they're really and truly afraid of having squatters or ocupas in there, or either waiting for something. That all should get moving. The solution for the housing crisis, one of them at least, would be to
there are a number of things,
to be able to dump those properties progressively into the market.
Yeah.
That will, lower the prices a little bit, or at least steady them, and it will offer more options for people.
Yeah, we'd like to see some of the big companies that are profiting at the moment from the property market to perhaps be targeted with, I don't know, let's say 5% to invest in those properties and get them on the market, especially, like I said, for community housing. A completely different tack, but something that's certainly caught the eye of the legal eagles is this the EU telling Spain off for taxing non-residents on theoretical property earnings. So that's effectively being charged, even though the property is empty, but they're not renting them out, right? So,
yes.
But now there are a couple of things here. The first one that I always remember is if you can't do it to an EU citizen, you can't do it to a non-resident because the European Union don't like it.
That's right. That's exactly it. We've been already punished a couple of times for things like that, and it's a good example of what Pedro Sanchez said about increasing the tax on the purchase for properties that are non-residents by 100%. It's probably really not going to work. Here you've got another example. We've been charging people for the IRNR, el impuesto de la renta de los no residentes, or non-resident tax, the Form 210, for years and years and years, for forever. But really that tax does not correspond to anything tangible. Okay, so if you own a property in Spain, you pay utilities, of course. You get water, electricity, gas, you have internet, you have to pay for those. If you're part of a community, you pay community fees. Of course, it's part because you are sustaining or supporting the costs of having a pool or a lift, stuff like that.
Gardeners.
Right. Yeah. Whatever. Security, whatever. Right. You pay the local taxes, right? The council tax and the refuse collection, because, you've got refuse collection and you need somebody to fix the street lights and stuff like that. So that's covered. So what is the non-resident tax for then? Right? When I explain this to clients, I tell them that it's a tax, and this is true, by the way. I really explain it like this. It's a tax on the pleasure of owning a property in Spain, and it must be a tax on the pleasure because they already tax you for everything else. So the pleasure of owning
it's the only thing it can be for.
It's the only thing remaining. So yes, it's not a big tax. It can be about 65% of what you pay as council tax.
Okay.
So if you pay 500 euros council tax, it could be like 350 euros a year. But you have to make the declaration. The tax return, you have to make it every year on purpose. So you cannot set it up automatically as a direct debit. And let's be honest, it's also a big earning for law firms and gestores everywhere. So here in Pellicer Heredia, we have hundreds of clients that would do these non-resident tax with us, as do all of the law firms. It's a big earning. But it's true that it's always being a little bit unfair.
Well, the European Commission's given, urging, I think they're saying, they're not telling them just yet, but they're urging the Spanish authorities to correct the situation within 2 months. That's a short space of time, really, but that's what they've said. And if they don't respond or solve the problem, they've said that they may well go to the European Court of Justice.
Right. So I think two things can happen off of this. If, the European Union gets this way, which probably they will, as they are, the big fish on the pond.
Mm-hmm.
If they get this way, then what's going to happen is probably people will have to stop paying these non-resident tax. Good for the people, and maybe even they will be able to claim a little bit back.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the last 4 years, which is normally when taxes
last 4 years on tax.
It's a very good question. What exactly could be? Again, the ink is not. I wouldn't say that it's wet. It's not yet even finished writing
exactly.
it. But we'll be expecting to see. But that could be one possibility.
Indeed, super tax. I think it's been called by some people, hasn't it?
Yeah,
but
I like
it. We'll certainly keep an eye on that and let you know if there are any changes or as soon as we hear any more about it. On the way after the break with Antonio from AlicanteLawyers.es, a story out of the Canary Islands, actually, where tenants are being warned of a growing fraud by landlords using the personal use, quote-unquote, clause to evict tenants. Interesting stuff this afternoon with Antonio from AlicanteLawyers.es, looking at all aspects of the property market. And we came across a story, Antonio, about the Tenerife Tenants Union, who've been raising the alarm over a growing number of rental fraud cases in the Canaries, and it's happening in the mainland as well. Landlords are abusing the legal loophole to evict tenants and then re-rent properties at higher prices or convert them into holiday lets. It's all about making money, but it's basically where the tenants are told the landlord needs the home for themselves or a family member, which, of course, an individual landlord can do.
Yes, of course.
Under normal circumstances. But the tenants' union realised that there's a spate of these cases. So they've now said that actually tenants can demand proof if they receive a notice like that, which,
Of course.
But you have to, immediately act on the situation.
Yes.
Demanding the full documentation. You need to send it by registered letter.
Yes.
So it remains legal. And you need to ask the documentation to justify the claim, including identity of the future occupant, proof of their family relationship to the landlord, a sworn declaration, proof of residency, empadronamiento, property records showing whether the person already owns another property as well, because they could be just saying my gran needs to move in but she's already somewhere else, so there's been obviously a lot of abuse by landlords trying to push tenants out to make more money out of a property. But at least there is a legal way for people to combat this if they get this letter from their landlord, but you need to act quickly and act properly legally.
Yes, of course. Legally, of course.
Yeah.
If not, imagine. Now, yes, that's true. Well, the thing is, the law in Spain tends to protect tenants over landlords. Probably tenants don't think like that, but it is truly what it is. It's been like that for almost 100 years, I could say. So Franco definitely protected also renters. We cannot say too many things good about Franco, but there you go. Anyway, that and the swamps. They're always very, very proud about the swamps. Anyway, so that means that once a tenancy agreement starts, it can only be finalized after 5 years and then renewed for another 3. So even if it says on your tenancy agreement that you got year by year, you really got 5. So that means that during those 5 years, the landlord cannot expect to, after 1 year, tell him, well, just leave. The landlord may freely sell the property, but it will come with a tenant inside. Yeah. So the new buyer, the new owner, is going to have a tenant inside unless they agree, they make an agreement with the tenant for the tenant to vacate. So the fact that you sell the property or even that you die, the tenancy is carried on to the next owner. So kind of a tenancy contract is almost unbreakable for those 5 years. Mm-hmm. So basically almost the only way, besides obviously the tenant breaching the contract because they don't pay, stuff like that, then basically the only way that the landlords truly have to kick them out is tell them, well, I actually need the property for myself. I don't have another property to live. I've sold it or whatever, so I'm going to move to yours, to the one that you are now using, and they have to give it 2 months. Or if it's not the landlord themselves, there has to be a close family member. Mm-hmm. But, once you've got that, then I'm sure there are a few landlords, I hope not too many, but there are a few landlords that say, well, I could tell him that, even though it's not really true.
Well, there's been a spike in cases,
So, yes,
certainly in the
he
Canaries
goes
since
out,
2022.
and I'm renting it for him for 900, but I see my neighbor is renting it for 1,200, so I could get 12. So that's, 3,600 euros extra a year.
Indeed.
So they will be thinking things like that. So, either forging or lying straight to the tenant. So yes, definitely the tenant should organize, should not vacate the property just because the landlord tells you that. And the landlord should be able to provide full proof that their claim is absolutely correct and it's the only real option. So that means that the family member that's going to use the property doesn't have any of the property on the area, that they must move there because that's where they're going to work, or that's where the kids go to school, and also that they cannot be housed inside of the landlord's house. So one landlord, big house,
Why can't they live with you?
Why can't they live with you? So that's one of the. It's not a foolproof system, but
No.
that has been won in court. It's like making the landlord have to, get his son and granddaughter back into the house because the tenant said, no, I'm living here. You have to wait.
No.
Right? So yes, definitely not trust the landlord just their word, but getting full paper or full unconvertible proof that what they're saying is true.
See, in a normal market, it used to not be too much of a problem. If the landlord said, we do want the property back, then, you go and find a similar property for similar price.
You'll find
But the
another
problem
one.
now is you don't find one for a similar price. You might be
That's it.
paying 800 next door, they're paying 1250 because they just moved.
Right.
So,
That's right. That's the cases.
know.
All the cases that we're seeing now of tenants refusing to leave is because the price of the rent the prices are absolutely madness. I was doing last
in
week.
some places double, actually, in some parts of Spain.
Actual double. I was going for that. I was, in fact, doing a tenancy agreement for a client last week. She was a tenant. She was concerned of getting ripped off by the landlord. Although I have to say that she's probably has been lucky because the landlord was a reasonable guy. But even with a reasonable contract as that it was, the rent was almost double the previous contract that I've done for a place on that very same street, very similar house, 3-4 years before. So madness.
Tell us about you. I like the fact that you always bring us with some details about some of your live cases. You were talking about, I mentioned earlier, about people buying an apartment where things didn't go quite to plan.
No, that's right. Well, I love my job.
And we know.
I have to say, not because
But it's about helping people with issues
of course.
when they're buying a house.
Informing. Right? And urban planning is fascinating, and all the cases are always very interesting, and the news and everything. Anyway, so it's very enjoyable. So, yes. So I had an old client of mine that bought an apartment with us a few years ago, right? So they bought an apartment in Cumbre del Sol. Perfect. But they didn't have the idea of living there. They were, in fact, going to rent it out. So they got a tourist license. Back then, you didn't need the community permission, so it was excellent, and there were a few more rentals, so they got the number and rented it out. So it looks like last year they decided to buy another one at another place. But this time they decided I could skip the lawyer because what did they do in the end? Which is fine. They can do whatever they want. They thought they already knew how it worked, and for most of it, so they find somebody to translate for them at the notary and bought another property. And then the property came with a license. They renewed the license just before they had the problem with the communities that now need to authorize rental licenses for tourist purposes for properties, and they started renting out. But now, as the boss said last time, you need to have a special number to register your property for rental purposes with the land registry. So they were because that gets into force on next Tuesday. So they decided to get one of those, and the land registry refused. And they went, why? Well, the apartment that you bought is not really an individual apartment freehold for you. You've bought on a complex, an aparta-hotel. So that's kind of apartments that are part like of a hotel complex. Kind of. Mm-hmm. So it has a reception, 24-hour service. So
they shouldn't have been able to buy it then as an individual property.
Yes. You didn't buy it as an individual property. What they bought were shares of the complex.
Ooh, wow, okay.
That, think about...
It's like a timeshare issue.
Yes, exactly that. I was going for that. So it's like a timeshare. Kind of. So what you buy is shares that are individualized on the form of an apartment. But it's not the same thing as having your own freehold apartment ownership. And because it was that part of Aparta Hotel.
Because they didn't use an independent lawyer, this was missed.
Yeah, because they were telling me, it's like, well, we went to the land registry and they've told us that this is a problem, but we know because we went to the community that in fact it's not an apart hotel, that was the idea by the builder when they were building the apartment in 2007, and then it crashed. The builder could not finish, so when they finished construction, they just left the legal structure like it is, but they were sold as individual. And I told him,
but the original paperwork says what it says.
Everything says apart hotel. The
Wow.
only way that I know that I can know it's not is just actually going there, which the land registry is not going to. And they told me, please fix this. And I looked at it, it's like, but how did you sign this deed? It's very clear here that you're buying shares, and it says Aparta Hotel on the deed like 5 times. So who did the due diligence?
Translation?
Yeah, they had somebody to translate, a gestor, which is fine. But probably the gestor either didn't know or was not made aware that what was the apartment going to be used for.
Yeah.
Because buying shares for Apart Hotel is absolutely fine. If the Apart Hotel has not been fully executed, that can be fine as well. But if you're going to use it to get a tourist license to rental, not. In fact, the problem the clients have is not that they're not going to get the number. No, it's that they have an illegal license
Indeed.
Right. So they have a license to rent as a tourist a place that can only be rented out paperwork-wise as an apart hotel. So that's an illegal license. And you may wonder, how can you get an illegal license? Because you sign a sworn statement saying that the property complies with all the requirements to be rented out as with a tourist license, which it does not. So they've lied on an official statement submitted to the administration. So I told them I would be more concerned about that more than, will I ever profit from that? Basically, my advice is either you cancel the license and go live there or use it, or just sell it.
Yeah, but you'll have to sell it under the circumstances of what the property was originally.
And full disclose to the next buyers.
Wow. Antonio, thank you very much indeed. We could go on, but we don't have time. And we look forward to the next time you're with us. Every couple of weeks, we catch up with AlicanteLawyers.es. Always interesting when it comes down to the property experts. And you can find out more at AlicanteLawyers.es. If you have any issues, go to the website, get in touch. They'll help you out. Thank you.
Thank you.